Welcome everybody to the Scale Up Show. This is your host Ryan Staley, and I have a very special guest with me today. I have Advait Shinde, who is one of the co-founders of GoGuardian and is now the chairman. They actually provide K through 12 schools with new techniques to enable students to engage in better learning experiences. On top of it, too, Advait was selected for the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for education, and then was also a finalist for the Ernst & Young's prestigious Entrepreneur of the Year Award for Greater Los Angeles. Advait, welcome. Happy to have you on the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, dude, I'm excited, man. I love your take on AI for education and the future. I think you have a really unique background that you went from like co-founder to CEO to chairman, and then you're getting back involved in some of the future product development. So love that arc. Very unique for a guest on the show. And so at the same time, you have kind of like a macro view across our education environment, which is unique and exciting because I have kids going through it right now. And so real interested to get rolling. So Advait, before we kind of get too deep into it though, let's do a real quick revenue rundown so we understand what stage of the journey GoGuardian's at. So can you give us an idea on where you guys are at in terms of your revenue stage?
GoGuardian is north of about $100 million in revenue.
Okay, so you're north of 100 million. You have investors. Are they PE backed or VC backed?
Yeah, we're PE backed.
Okay, and didn't you guys just do that round in 21? I think it was. That's what I saw.
The majority recap round where we brought in private equity investors was in 2018.
Okay.
We also raised a smaller round back in 2021 as well.
Okay. And then how large is the team right now?
Total, the company is about 550 people or so.
Okay, 550. And then can you give our listeners just like a quick high level understanding of like what the solution does and then how it serves the education community?
Sure. Yeah, we have products that span everything from ensuring kids are having safe experiences while using the internet, all the way to tools that enable teachers to teach more effectively in the classroom. We also have tools in the space of assessment, as well as even a tutoring platform. So really a wide range of things. And today we're serving about 1 in 2 students in the country.
That's awesome, man. Love that. For you, those of you that don't know, I used to be on a school board, and that was a good, I think, 3-year run that I had, which was fun. At the same time, education needs a lot of help. So I think the fact that you guys are serving 1 out of 2 students is pretty insane, especially in that market. So let's get into it, man. Like, talk to me about where you think the state of AI is in education, specifically through, the K through 12, and then we'll expand into work later. But I think that's good foundational. Where do you think it's at right now? And then like, where do you see it going?
Yeah, one thing we usually say internally in GoGuardian is that in the grand scheme of history, I think we're still at the earliest stages of technology in the classroom and more broadly, just the earliest stages of figuring out how to educate kids in general. And when you layer on something like AI, I don't think the world at large has really truly understood what this is, let alone sort of us having figured it out in an educational context. So it's a super interesting time, particularly because in the US, at least, every kid basically has a school issued device. And there's already high speed internet, and many, if not most, of the workflows have shifted on these devices. So it seems like all of the prerequisites have been met. But if you think about the workflows of how teachers teach or how students learn, those workflows more or less look exactly the same as they've been looking for decades, more or less. It's just that we're using a digital tool instead of the corresponding pre-digital tool. And so with that in mind, like, prerequisites are met, but we haven't really substantially changed the way that we approach teaching and learning as a result of the technology sort of being there. And I see that at least over the next decade or so, a substantial amount of change on the horizon in a good way, in the sense that we can truly leverage the potential of these devices to change workflows in a way that actually increases learning engagement and hopefully also translates into improved learning outcomes as well. And again, we're at the earliest stages of that journey.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah, there was a lot of that. Because it was funny, like the kids at the school that I was in the school board of, that my kids go to, they didn't even have tablets, like one-to-one devices. This was in like 2019. So luckily we got it in right before COVID hit. So then that was something that they had access to. So I guess my question for you is, and I'd love your take on this, because I look at children in the K through 12 as I mean, sometimes they're more dynamic learners than adults. Not in all cases, but sometimes. And so, like, what would you see are the top three of your favorite AI use cases when it comes to learning specifically with AI?
I can answer this question maybe from my own personal experience as a learner. I think ChatGPT and large language models in general have really, really unleashed my learning trajectory personally. If you think about literally any topic, the process of figuring out how to approach that topic from a learning perspective is kind of daunting, especially when you're on the earlier side of that learning journey. You don't really have this broader awareness of everything that you should understand, like the topics or the skills. You don't really understand how everything relates together. And so it's kind of hard for you to find resources, videos, articles, books, etc., and then piece together all of this information unless you have like an active teacher or an expert that's kind of guiding you. And so here, I think ChatGPT and LLMs in general is a really interesting unlock. I mean, firstly, just the sort of interactivity of you being able to ask any question, get an answer, and clarify a topic. And in particular, what's been really interesting to me is relating concepts in the context of things that you already understand. So being clear about, okay, I get X, Y, and Z, but help me understand how this other thing relates to the things that I already understand. In a really important and meaningful way. I think the way that we learn is by understanding the relationships of concepts between each other. And I think ChatGPT does a great job of sort of arbitrarily connecting any dots. That said, I think from a K-12 learning perspective, we haven't sort of reached the holy grail quite yet. And if you think about this from the perspective of like an average middle schooler, you can't really expect a young student to take this sort of self-directed control over their learning journey, where they're in the driver's seat, asking questions, asking for clarification, developing an understanding of their own understanding of topics. And so to the extent that being successful with LLMs requires you to sort of drive that learning journey for yourself, I think we have a lot more work to do to make that experience easy and natural for younger students who maybe don't have the level of self-awareness to make the fullest use of those tools. So I think it's in that context we haven't really seen substantial change or improvement in learning outcomes as a consequence of AI, but it seems like the potential is obviously very, very close.
Okay. So yeah, totally agree with that. So let's break that down because you hit two different areas. So let's hit your personal example first. And I think that's great about basically using ChatGPT to relate different concepts together or to expand on it. Can you give us a specific example of how you used it through that light? Because I don't think most people have leveraged it that way before.
Yeah, so take something as simple as reading a research paper. So at GoGuardian, we spend a lot of time going through the history of academic research, particularly in education and learning psychology and things like that. And oftentimes when you're reading like an advanced paper, you stumble across a number of, I don't know, concepts that you might not be immediately exposed to, but are sort of par for the course for experts in the field. So without a tool like ChatGPT, you're kind of stuck having to sort of read paper after paper after paper to ultimately develop that broader understanding. But you can use an LLM to basically say, okay, here's the research paper, literally just pop the whole PDF in there and say, I don't understand this section over here. Can you break it down? And that kind of kickstarts an interactive flow where it might explain the concept in a certain way. And then you can further respond saying, okay, I understand this piece over here, but I don't understand this other piece. And I think after just a couple iterations like that, you invariably get to a much deeper understanding of the paper in a much more frictionless way compared to if you were responsible for going to the original textbooks to get that information yourself. So I think as like a learning assistant, let's say, where you have a clear paper or chapter in a textbook or something like that where you're trying to understand, doing that in a semi-interactive way with ChatGPT is actually really, really powerful.
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. I think like it's funny because I made a video about this not too long ago, but one of my favorite use cases is basically doing that same thing, but with a book, right? Having a book summarized, like leveraging Pareto's principle. so that you got, the 20% that's worth 80% of value. And then from there, customizing it to your situation, and then having it, kind of the summary rewritten for you, and then taking it one step further and say, okay, I want to execute this now. And I'll create worksheets and like guides on how to do this. And it'll do all that. Like I literally did that one time. I was like, I'm just going to test it. I did it with the voice activation piece on the app for ChatGPT, like while I was shaving, and it got through like a whole book, and I did it in like 12 minutes. And not that I shaved that long, but brushed my teeth, did the whole morning
Yeah,
routine, if you will, right?
totally.
And so that's what I think of when it was talking. I love the research paper use case, because those are pretty thick. Like reading
Yeah.
through that, and it's just hard to get through. And then the drill down, it does an amazing job at that. So I think that's awesome. Let's talk about the second point that you mentioned with the self-directed learning and how K through 12 doesn't necessarily take that route. And it's funny because I've been thinking about this lately too, with work and how work's done. And like, I think a lot of I almost said humans, adult humans, if you will, right? Don't really take the self-directed learning approach as well for themselves. So what do you think the answer is for that? Do you think it's more so, instead of us prompting the LLM or the AI tool, for that tool to prompt us just based on our feedback and objectives, or what do you think is the solve for that specifically?
I think at a super high level, we need a system that first teachers or even students or parents can basically set a set of learning objectives. So this might be a set of skills or standards, and maybe a time horizon where the student is expected to understand or master those skills or standards. And so once we have that, that essentially forms you can call it like a scaffolding for where we ultimately need to get to. Then I think the next piece is the system needs to understand what is the current state of understanding of the student. So really, what is the starting point of this journey? And there's pretty straightforward approaches that we can take to developing that prerequisite understanding, right? It's basically just asking the students questions and then seeing how they respond to those questions, and then inferring from those responses what is the level of mastery across the set of skills. And so once you have that starting state and you have the final destination, then it's a matter of determining a learning plan. So you can think of that as basically a sequence of skills that you need to, or ordering that you need to visit. So skill 1, skill 2, skill 3, so on. And then historically in the pre-LLM world, really the only means that we had to teaching those skills would be to resort to, let's say, static or pre-existing content. So videos, text, whatever people used to learn before the LLM era, and then more or less sort of recommending it to the student and having them consume it, and then asking questions on the back of that consumption to update your mental model of, okay, did they get it or not? You more or less repeat this process. But now with the LLM era, we can basically generate that learning experience on the fly. So generate that explanation, and more importantly, use the surrounding context that we have about the student, whether it's their prerequisite understanding, or maybe it's where they live or what their interests are, other sort of axes of personalization, you might call them, as context to inform the LLM around how to go about explaining this concept or skill. And our belief is that that kind of personalization is inherently going to be not just more engaging, because it's more contextually relevant to that student, but to the extent that it's based on the student's prerequisite understanding, it's not explaining something in the context of the student doesn't understand. And instead, it's explaining it in the context of things that we've sort of already demonstrated mastery on. And in that, hopefully that explanation is way more effective and the student is able to make progress. And our view is that if you just repeat this process over and over and over again, perhaps layering on every now and then, revisiting prior skills, because it's important that we sort of recall previously learned information in order to preserve mastery over time. I think as long as the system is balancing new information with practicing old information, all the while keeping track of the sort of set of understanding of the student, invariably the student is going to make forward progress in a way that feels much more optimal than the current structure or the current system that we have in K-12 today.
Yeah, that's really, that's super interesting. Is that a learning framework that you just kind of broke down right there? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I guess you could think about it as A few things. Firstly, it has a lot to do with our product strategy here at GoGuardian in terms of what we're aiming for. But I think it also has a lot to do with years or decades, honestly, of established academic research out there, which has been asking the question, how do we teach kids more effectively? And so if you think about techniques like mastery learning is relatively straightforward technique where we really move on to concept B only when we've demonstrated mastery in concept A. Seems like a sort of very obvious thing. Structurally, K-12 is just not oriented around that kind of mastery learning structure, which we can talk about why that might be and what we do about it. But there's just so much research out there that's already established that mastery learning techniques are significantly more effective, in some cases like 2 standard deviations more effective than the default scenario of just sort of blitzing through skills without much regard of whether students have demonstrated mastery or not. And so it's really just sort of taking the established efficacy of mastery learning and then saying, okay, now we have large language models that can actually generate learning experiences on the fly. And sure, maybe we haven't had studies to show how LLM generated content works or doesn't work in this way. But our view is that we've already been shown that mastery learning is effective with both static content as well as sort of personalized tutoring. And so this feels like very, very similar, if not even more effective from the perspective of cost and personalization. And so to us, it feels very, very obvious that this should be the sort of structure to actually enable mastery learning at scale.
Without a doubt, man. I agree because that's so true. I think you explained it awesome, right? You did a great job of cutting through that and then weaving it all together, and that makes so much sense. So we're just about up on time. We are going to have you back for a part 2, which I'm excited about. We're going to get into some of your journey and some of the underpinnings and some of what we're talking about now. However, the question I had for you before we jumped was like, how important do you think AI skills are for the future of work?
That's a good question. It's sort of like going back in time 20 years and asking, how important do you think internet skills are going to be for the future of work? Like, as we imagine work here in 2024, the concept of internet skills and work skills are sort of indistinguishable from each other. It's like, it's so expected in such a sort of established way in which everybody more or less gets work done today, that to even ask the question of whether internet skills are relevant seems silly. I think of AI skills in a very similar way, where as AI basically changes workflows such that more or less every single workflow is going to be either AI enabled or AI assisted, the concept of asking the question of is AI going to be relevant or is AI mastery going to be useful? It's like, of course it is. It's going to be everything that we know and do, I think, is going to be affected by AI in some way. That seems very, very clear to me.
I can't agree with you more. And I think, however, there are some people that needed to hear that, right? Because they're still not like grasping onto it, right? So it was a pleasure having you on today, man. Where can people find you? Where can they find out more about you? And then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, check us out on GoGuardian.com, and you can also add me on LinkedIn, Advait Shinde.
Awesome. Well, Advait, it was great having you, and we will see you on the next episode.